How do they make such an amazing fake? Look at that.
Hey everyone out there, this is Lee the Appraiser from the world famous APR57 gallery here in New York City. And today we have another episode of a quote live appraisal, no rehearse, no nothing. We're looking at it live for the first time. And I'd like to introduce, your name is?
Francesco.
Francesco, okay. And how did you hear about us, by the way?
I always been fascinated of your store from the outside, and I just stumbled in a couple of days ago.
Okay.
And I was intrigued of the way you told me about the watch that I'm wearing at the moment.
Okay.
And I asked you if you can please look at another piece that I have that I have no idea what year it is, where it comes from, and so on.
Okay, let me see what we have here. And you just acquired this watch, is that correct? Okay, so what we have here appears to be a Rolex. This is called a Daytona. It actually says it on the above the white circle at 6 o'clock. It says it in red, and that typically is called a big red Daytona with the letters in big bold red letters. This is a mechanical watch that Rolex made. They made them anywhere from typically with the Daytona emblem on it, they made them typically from the late 60s to up until approximately 1980. This style and period watch was made with what was called the mechanical movement that had to be wound. Okay, you hear it winding. And it was made primarily, this style was sort of introduced by Paul Newman in a movie that he did. It's one of the most popular watches in the world, and certainly amongst one of the most popular from Rolex. So this gentleman had purchased it recently, so we're going to basically look at it closely and examine it and see if it's worth what he paid, and maybe possibly much more. I will tell you that these watches, authentic, in perfect condition, have sold for a couple $100,000. Okay, and there's one that was made with a slightly different dial. Basically, the watch is pretty much identical, but it had like red slight markers around the 3 subdials and around the edge. It's called the Paul Newman Daytona. It got that name from the fact that Paul Newman wore it in a specific movie where he raced, and I think it was called the Daytona 500 race, and it got that moniker as the Paul Newman name. There's a couple variations, but typically it's this dial with a little red markings around the small dials and the full dials, and that one there has a story totally by itself, where it turns out that when Paul Newman he married, I think it was John Woodward, they had a son, and their boy, I'm sorry, they had a daughter, and their daughter was going out with a guy, and Paul Newman had the watch that he had himself from Rolex that he wore for a couple of years, and his daughter would appear to be getting engaged to this gentleman, and Paul Newman gave it to him as a gift that his possible future son-in-law would have. And the story goes that they ultimately did not get married, so it turned out not to be his future father-in-law. But the story goes that about, I think it was maybe 7 years ago, that he was telling this story to a friend of his, and they told him, you better get that watch appraised. That could be very valuable, if in fact it's the watch, original Daytona, that Paul Newman supposedly gave you. And it had the engraving on there, whatever it was, I don't remember, but there's wishes there. And that watch was estimated to bring like $5 million at auction. It was sold, this is about 3 or 4 years ago. I had a client of mine that came in for the sale, and he was prepared to bid $17 million for this watch. So, and he didn't get it. It sold for $18 million, and the next day it resold for $22 million. That's, I think, the highest price that was ever paid for a wristwatch. And so it was very close to this watch, not quite. So we're going to look at this particular model and check it out carefully in front of everyone and give them a little estimate of what we're talking about. What I'm doing here is that I am pushing the pins in. They have a band. Rolexes are made with, well, the watch itself is made in stainless steel. Okay, so if you push the pins in simultaneously, typically it'll open up the bracelet. Now what we want to do is, this is the case of the wristwatch. Okay, so Rolex had the habit, and still does, of putting typically the reference number, which is the model number or the style, with numbers engraved on the top of the watch at 12 o'clock. Okay, once you push it properly, it's like anything. Once you learn how to do it, it's very easy. If you don't know how to do it, it's a very difficult task. So we have the head of the watch. This is called the head in the case. And you have numbers over here and numbers over here. The numbers on the at top at 12 o'clock, I'll read them to you and then you can close up on it. It says 6265. Okay? And on the bottom at 6 o'clock, those numbers are going to read 2851490. A serial number that starts at 28 is approximately 1970-71 is when this watch would be recorded as made or manufactured at that time. That's the serial number that dates the model. The 6265 refers to this model of Daytona with the style. It came with typically a silver or white dial with black sub-seconds and black small dials. That's typically called the Panda dial. This one here is the black dial with the white sub-seconds. And the way it works is it's called a tachometer chronograph, Daytona chronograph, cosmograph actually. So the idea behind the watch is you have a bezel here that has numbers from 60 all the way. This was made particularly for racing, so I'll just give you an example of how it works. So you're going to push the top button. Now these watches typically are the very first that were waterproof. So that's the idea with the screw down chrono. So now the second hand is moving there of the watch. This is just for the chronograph. So assuming at 12 o'clock we were racing, you had a car, it was made for racing, you're racing, and you covered 1 mile between those approximately 20 seconds, 19 seconds. So that number on the right would indicate that you were going approximately 190 miles per hour. Got that? So it does have, and if you were continuing racing, you would push it again, and you would go there, and then that would mean now you slow down. If you do that same period of time in a mile, that would be your 160 miles an hour. This is a mechanical watch, so you wind it, and it moves, and it'll typically hold the spring and hold the wind for typically 24 to 48 hours, at which point then you have to wind it again. Okay, certain watches that Rolex made, they made the first, I believe, was Oyster Perpetual watch, probably in the I'm guessing 1930s or early 40s. This is a mechanical watch, and you know, most of the Rolexes made after 1970 are all automatic perpetuals. They're called Oyster Perpetual. So everything right now so far looks okay. We're going to open it up. I mean, there are a couple issues here I have to say right off the bat that are, for me, very obvious. It's going to be difficult for a novice or somebody who's not an expert in Rolex to really see these things as quickly and clearly. But if you look at the watch here, you will notice how clear the bezel is. That the imprint on the bezel looks as if it's brand new. These numbers, 6570, 7580, they're like they were made yesterday. So that's a tip-off that we might have something here that might not be exactly what it's purported to be. You have to understand, this watch, if genuine, could be worth upwards of a couple $100,000. So every part in its own would be extremely valuable. An original bezel for an original watch, I mean, somebody's looking to replace it, they lost theirs and looking to replace it, could easily sell for $10,000 by itself. All right, so the first thing that I see here, that these markings are so crisp and clear, they don't indicate that they were on or are on an original watch from, say, 1970, which is 50 years old. I'm going to now examine carefully the serial numbers here and the reference number, 65, which we've discussed. And those as well have a little different appearance than typically one would see on an original watch. The dial, again, is, I'm going to say, looks quite too new, clean, and pristine to probably be an original dial as well. I'm going to open this watch up. We have a special case opener that we use that's made specifically for this model Rolex. It turns and twists what we call the treads. Okay. This is the inside of the watch. This is the movement. And now we have the bracelet here. Okay, so altogether you have probably a couple hundred pieces of which they'll put the watch together. Okay? And you have a couple prominent pieces of which you're talking about the case, the serial number, the dial, the crystal, the back case, the bracelet. The best way for me to say this is every piece on this watch appears to be slightly off. And the reason every piece is slightly off is if one is going to try to make a counterfeit or pass off a counterfeit, they're not going to go to the trouble. They're not. You have to think in their mind. They're not going to, take an original watch, even parts of it that is worth $10, $20, $30, $50,000, and add, $500 or $1,000 worth of parts on it and sell it for less than 50 grand. Every part is made specifically for the Rolex and is very valuable. Meaning if just this bracelet alone is original, and this is the original bracelet that went on this watch, this bracelet would be worth, now typically oyster bracelets are not worth that much use, maybe they're worth today $1,000, $1,500, but this bracelet would be worth $4 or $5 grand if it was the original bracelet that went on this watch. Now if you look closely on this, you will see the imprint on the buckle. And Francesco, do you see that? You see how clear and crisp that buckle is. Another buckle from a watch with the bracelet should not be this clear and crisp from a watch that's 50 years old. It just shouldn't be the case. What you have are numerous signals that show that every part, while by themselves, you might give it the benefit of the doubt and say, well, maybe it's good, it's probably good. But when you see 15 different parts, the serial number, the dial, the bezel, the bracelet, the imprint Rolex on the bracelet, all these things together, I think we can make a very unfortunate conclusion that this looks like a very, very good copy of a Rolex. It's going to be very difficult even to put a value on it, because what do you have, what's the value of a watch that basically intrinsically the entire watch is a good counterfeit? Do you want to discuss where you purchased it from?
I put it on an auction.
Online?
Online auction.
Uh-huh.
And I asked, it was all original, to say yes.
Well, I would think so. Would have you bought it if they say it's not all original?
Of course not.
Of course not. Okay. So, so I guess you're going to try, possibly with my help, to see if you can get your money back, correct?
Of course.
Of course, okay. Are there any other watches that you purchased at this auction that you want to discuss?
Not from this exact auction. I bought other watches online, but from this specific auction, this was the only.
This was the only one. And the other two watches were from a different auction?
Different auction, same platform, or buying through an app.
So what we're going to do is, and what we've done many times in the past, is to see if we can help him, hopefully get his money back. Do you want to say what you spent for this? I mean, if it was perfect, it would be worth between probably $150,000 and $200,000. So what did you pay for this? $48,000. Were there any commissions above that or no?
No, that was the price.
48.
Yes.
I mean, you want to make sure, if possible, you're dealing with a business that if you have a problem, you can come back and meet them, show it to them. That's why we have so many like repeat clients in our stores, that they come here and they know they can come back to us. There's a problem. Every item we sell, we give them a written guarantee for at least 2 years. Parts, labor, next day service, everything. And you should buy by a place that stands behind it. So, you know the name? You don't have to say the name, but you know the name of this auction? I think it was just a platform for somebody, like...
It's a platform that connects you to the live auctioneer, connects you to different auctions around the United States. This one's called Gallery 54 out of Georgia, Atlanta.
Okay, all right, we'll find out. I mean, you know, when these things happen, you know, you want to first approach it by just that, hopefully, that the seller, auctioneer, whatever it is, you want to hope that they made an honest mistake, that they wouldn't intentionally do this. So that's what I'm going to advise you later, is just to hope that they did that. Now, do they have an estimate on this watch for sale?
I don't remember.
Okay. So, but long story short is, if you buy something for half or a third of what the market price should be, that should give you some suspicion as to the genuineness of the item you're purchasing. Because in reality, you know, any dealer today would pay a minimum of $75,000 to $100,000 for this. So that's the first clue why myself or most other knowledgeable collectors or dealers didn't even bid on it, because they could see, even online, probably from the clear photographs that were shown, that it was not genuine. And again, we're going to give the auction house or whoever sold it the benefit of the doubt, but I'd be very surprised that even if the auction house didn't know when they listed it, that at least several collectors and dealers told them, wait a second, we can see from the photographs it's not good, you should pull that item. So anyhow, so if you need any watches appraised or evaluated, we're typically able to do it by pictures, although something like this we may want to see in person. We're available here in New York on 57th Street. You can bring your stuff in. We buy everything at the highest prices. We'll appraise them for you. If they need to be repaired, we can do that for you. But anyhow, so hopefully Mr. Francesco, by doing this, saved himself almost $50,000. Hopefully, we're going to help him get his money back as much as we can. And, you know, hopefully there might be a part 2. Let's hope it's good news. Okay? And if you want to bring in the other watches for us to look at, you're more than welcome to do that as well.
Thank you.
Okay?
Thank you.
So, Francesco, a pleasure. Thank you very much. I wish I had better news. But the good news is you just recently bought this. No, you just bought this.
Yeah, of course.
So the good news is that hopefully you'll. That's just another thing to remember. That look at the return policy, especially. I mean, I'd be very leery about buying expensive items online that you know might very possibly be not genuine. Okay, so for today, we're going to say goodbye to everyone and good luck and stay healthy and stay safe. Okay.
How do they make such an amazing fake? Look at that. But now that you mention it, of course, look, the numbers are so perfect, crispy.
It's like brand new. I mean, it's like brand new here. Look here.
And this is the part that really I ruined watches.
Vintage
This is the
Daytona.
part that you ruined the most.
626.